Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
My name is Rabbi Weller. I am joined here by the outstanding musicians and soon-to-be cantor in just a few days. Cantor Emily Short, I went right for cantor, and our accompanist, Daniel Miron. Today, as I think about our Torah portion, Achrei Mot Kedoshim, I think of one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite books, The Brothers Karamazov. So Dostoevsky writes, "I love humanity, but I wonder at myself. The more I love humanity in general, the less I love man in particular. In dreams, I often make plans for the service of humanity, yet I am incapable of living in the same room with anyone for 2 days together. In 24 hours, I begin to hate the best of men, one, because he's too long over his dinner, and another, because he has a cold and keeps on blowing his nose." I love that quote. I think Dostoevsky captures it well. It's easy to hold a conceptual love for all people without distinction. The idea of universal love is a very attractive one. Yet love in itself is practice, and it's very hard work. It requires us to pay attention to the particulars of people, the unique and specific needs of others that challenge us when they lay beyond the realm of what is pleasant or comfortable. Now, this week, as I mentioned, we read the parsha dedicated to the notion of loving one's neighbor, Achrei Mot Kedoshim. And in verse 18, we read that very famous line, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. Some call it the golden rule, but the wording is not treat others the way you want to be treated. It's love your neighbor as yourself. Love your kinsman as yourself. Reacha, someone who's sitting close to you. The person sitting right next to you in the waiting room who keeps blowing their nose and quietly driving you crazy. The person whose poor behavior demands a crucial conversation, the kind you're terrified to initiate. This parsha presents myriad rules for interpersonal engagement and the ongoing practice of loving particular people, not just the unnamed victims of some terrible thing that happened far away from us. Not that we shouldn't care about those people, but this portion also pushes us to love the widow, orphan, and stranger, so we care for the vulnerable. But we cannot assume that our work of moral development stops at passion for strangers. This parsha gives us rules on how to relate to people we see every day, the hard, ongoing, and ever-evolving challenge of loving that person sitting right next to you. That's a daily spiritual practice offered to you by Parshat Achrei Mot Kedoshim. Now, after services today, we have the privilege of learning from Rabbi Michael Strassfeld and his book, Judaism Disrupted, a spiritual manifesto for the 21st century. In this book, he offers 13 spiritual principles that he thinks defines Judaism today and in the future. Specifically, he presents the work of honoring the divine image in others as a spiritual practice and a practice much like a meditation practice. And I think that practice is much like that offered by Achrei Mot Kedoshim. Every day, we encounter people around us, and we have endless opportunities to sharpen our ability to care, to respect, and to love those around us. And in doing so, we can witness God's many images and refractions around us. Now, I personally engage in a daily kindness practice, and I find that each moment of connection and respect that I cultivate and receive gives me a glimpse of that divine silhouette, the shimmering presence of the divine in a world made of people created in God's image. So as we turn to Elohai Neshama on page 78, let's reflect on that slice of the holy that returns to us every day, that makes us unique, that deserves kindness and reaches out to the best version of those you encounter around us, asking each person you encounter to walk in the words of today's parsha, to love one's neighbor, to protect the vulnerable, to affirm a moral universe, as Rabbi Michael Strassfeld articulates. And that universe is held by that same neighborly love, ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. So we turn to page 78.
ושמרה בקרבי. Elohai, Elohai, neshama. Elohai, Elohai, neshama. Shenatata bi tehorahi, tehorahi.
We turn to page 94 for Baruch Shemar.
Baruch she'amar v'haya ha'olam, Baruch hu, Baruch oseh v'reishit, Baruch omer ve'oseh, Baruch gozer u'mkayem, Baruch merachem al ha'aretz, Baruch merachem al habriot, Baruch mishalem sachar tov lireav, Baruch chai la'ad v'kayam lanetzach, Baruch bodeh u'matzil, Baruch shemo. Bishvachot u'vizmirot negadelcha, u'nshabechacha u'mfa'ercha, v'naskir shimcha v'namlichacha malkeinu Eloheinu. Yachid chei ha'olamim, melech meshubach u'mfo'ar ad yad shemo hagadol. Baruch ata Adonai, melech mechulal batishbachot.
Amen. Page 100.
Hallelujah, bekosho, Hallelujah, bekiauzo, Hallelujah, bigvurotav, Hallelujah, kerov kudo, kol hadshamat Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. Take a shofar, hallelujah, benevel bechinor, hallelujah, betov umachol, hallelujah, beminim behugav, kol hanshamat hallelujah, 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 betzilt leishama. Hallelujah, Betzil Tzalei Trua, Kohan Shamate Hallelujah, Kohan Shamate Hallelujah, Kohan Shamate Hallelujah, 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 Kohan Shamate Hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
We now rise, if we're able, for our call to worship the Baruch Hu on page 108.
Lie, 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 lie. Baruch hu et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai
We read together on page 110, Yotzer Or. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Yotzer Or uvarei choshech, oseh shalom uvarei et hakol. Hameir la'aretz ladarim aleha barachamim, uvtuvo mechadesh bechol yom tamid maaseh v'reshit. Ma rabu maasecha Adonai, kulam b'chokhma asita, mal'a haaretz kinyanecha. Tit barach Adonai Eloheinu, al shevach maaseh yadecha, ve'al me'orei or she'asita yefarucha selah. Or chadash al Tzion ta'ir, v'niskeh hulanu mehera le'oro, baruch ata Adonai yotzer ha'me'orot. Page 114.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto.
116, you may be seated.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi metzavecha hayom alevavecha Vishinantam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, b'shivtecha b'veitecha, uv'lechtecha v'derech, uv'shofbecha uv'kumecha, u'kshartam leot al yadecha, v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha. Uchtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha leman tiskeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'hitem kedoshim lelohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim Lihiot lachem lelohim, ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem, Emet.
We continue on page 122, our freedom song, the Micha Mocha.
Micha Mocha, Bailim Adonai, mi kamocha, nekar b'kodesh, nora tehilot, osei feleh, nora tehilot, osei feleh, shira chadesha shibchu geulim, leshimcha sfat hayam, yacha kulam v'chodu, v'himlichu ve'amru, Adonai yimlo, leolam va'ed, Adonai yimlo, Yisrael ufidei chinumecha Yehuda veYisrael Go'aleinu Adonai Tzevaot Shemo Kedosh Yisrael Baruch Ata Adonai Ga'al Yisrael.
Amen. We'll now rise, approaching our standing prayer, the Amidah, first with Akavana Adonai Sefatai Tiftach on page 124. You can rise as you're able, of course.
Adonai Sefatai Tiftach Ufi Yagid Tehilatecha Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu v'Imotenu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gomer Chasadim Tovim V'Konei HaKol V'Zocher Chasdei Avot Ve'imahot U'Mevi Geula Livnei V'neihem Leman Shemo Be'ahava Melech Ozer U'Moshia U'Magen Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham ve'ezrat Sarah Atah Gibor le'olam Adonai Mechayei hakol Atah Rav le'hoshia Morid hatal Mechakel chayim bechesed Mechayei hakol berachamim rabim Somech noflim veroveh cholim Umatir asurim Umekayem emunato Lishenei afar Michamocha bal gevurot Umido melach Melech meimit umechaye Umatzmiach Yeshua V'ne'eman ata l'hachayot hakol Baruch atah Adonai Mechayeh hakol. Lai la lai 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 yai la lai 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 nekadesh at shimcha ba'olam Keshem shemakdishim oto bishmei marom Kakatuv al yad neviecha Vekara ze el ze ve'amar Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Tzevaot Meloch haaretz Kevodo Adir Adirenu Adonai Adonenu Ma'adir Shimcha Bechol Haaretz Baruch Kevod Adonai Mimkomo Echad Elo Malkeinu, Hu Moshienu, Vehu Yashmienu, Berachamav Le'enei Kol Chai. Ani Adonai Elohechem, Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohai Yichzion, ledor vador. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Sim Shalom is on page 140, and so we'll continue with our prayer for peace, and you may be seated.
Sim Shalom Tova Uveracha. Sim Shalom Tova Uveracha. Sim Shalom Tova Uveracha. Sim Shalom Tova Uveracha. Chen v'chesed v'rachamim Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael Amecha. Chen v'chesed v'rachamim ve'al kol Yisrael Amecha. Sim Shalom Tova Uveracha. Sim Shalom Tova Uveracha. Barcheinu Yotzreinu Kulanu Ke'echad Be'or Panecha. Ki ve'or panecha natata lanu Adonai Eloheinu. Sim Shalom Tova Uveracha. Sim Shalom Tova Uveracha.
We'll now take a moment for some silent meditation.
me. Holy, 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 holy. May the darkness within disappear with the faith that you're always near, like a mountain born from the sea, the spark of God within me. Holy, 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 holy.
We now begin our Torah service on page 244. Please rise as we take the Torah from the ark.
Ein kamocha va'Elohim Adonai, ve'ein kamasecha, malechutecha malechut kol amim, u'memshatecha b'chol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed, Adonai ons le'amo yitain, Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. Av harachamim heitiv avirtzoncha et Zion. Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim, Tivnei chomot Yerushalayim. Ki becha levad batachnu, melech eram v'nisa Adon olamim. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, udevar Adonai mirushalayim. Baruch Shana גדלו אדוני איתי, ומרוממה שמו יחדיו. לך אדוני הגדולה והגבורה והתפארת להנצח וההוד. כי כה בשמיים ובארץ, כי כה בשמיים ובארץ, לך אדוני הממלכה והמתנשא לכל ראש. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו רוממו.
You may be seated. Just as a brief introduction to Achrimot Kedoshim, a joint parsha. Achrimot deals heavily with our practices and rituals around Yom Kippur, so that the priestly observance is described as this highly involved and dramatic day-long ritual that involves donning special clothing for the day, sending away a scapegoat, and bringing an array of sacrifices to God, including a cloud of burning incense. And with this cloud of burning incense, the priest can enter the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum of the Mishkan, or the tabernacle, where God's presence was said to rest and where no man is allowed to enter otherwise. And so I think bridging this theme of Yom Kippur with Kedoshim, a parsha that deals heavily with the question of how we love our neighbors, how we love each individual kind of person that encounters us closely in our lives, it draws greater attention to the importance of those loving acts. The process of tshuva begins with the difficult interpersonal work of making amends for those you have wronged. We cannot even begin to atone until we engage in this work. Just as Rabbi Strassfeld describes in his book, A Moral Universe, discussed at the very start of this service, he also discusses the difficult work of teshuvah as a spiritual practice, and one that makes up a core component of Judaism. And for those of you who are unaware, I actually worked at a rehab center called Beit Shuvah. It was a 12-step based rehabilitation center that used this notion of teshuvah to help people find recovery. And so I find the idea of teshuvah to be quite a radical one that can completely transform one's life. And so it brings us back to how we behave when we are with others and how we can be our best selves in service of others. And so today we have a very special first aliyah. I'm going to invite up Steve Scheinfeld to chant in honor of his father's yahrzeit, and his wife, Chavalea, will come to recite the aliyah. Na la'amod l'aliyah harishona.
Baruch Hu et Adonai Hamvarach.
Baruch Adonai Hamavarach Leolam Va'ed.
Baruch Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. There you go. We're starting right here.
Amen. V'yidaber Adonai el Moshe acharei mot shnei b'nei Acharon v'koratam lifnei Adonai v'yachiti v'yomer Adonai el Moshe Dibar el Acharon achicha be'et yabei v'chol et el hakodesh mi beit lifarechet el pnei hakaparet asher el ha'aron v'lo yamot ki bana ara el hakaporet bot yavo atara el hakodesh before ben bakar lechatat v'ayel leola.
Thank you so much.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Thank you so much.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Shemera.
I think we have to meet Elia.
We have to.
We do, but I think we invited up Helen and Polly.
I know. Okay, I'm just gonna go.
Okay, great. Yeah, do what you can.
And now, with the Torah's presence in our midst, we can turn our minds to healing of mind, body, and spirit. We now take a moment to send those prayers to those we love and share their names in this space where we are a community of prayers. As I extend my arm throughout the room and gesture towards you, I ask you share the name of those loved ones so we can pray together. Please. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Rachmuna Bavina, Kaya Sarah, Elizabeth Wright, Kaya Malta, Audrey Shanklin, Raquel Sarah, David Ben Ruth, Gwen Mayotte, Gwen Rena Teresa, and Mary P.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any names I missed before I turn to our congregational list? Okay. This week in our congregation, we pray for the healing of Sandy Sarabin, Tracy Lustig, Cassie Lustig, Michael Umans, Eli Morrison, Paulette Cohane, Patricia Horn, Louise Weisbord, Stephanie Lasher, Steve Schwinder, Perry Suskin, Roy Suskin, Erica Suskin, Jane Wisen, Richard Carver, Shira Aleza, Robert Appel, Zvi Leschetz, Mark Miller, Ellen Kirshner, Bobby Waldman, Mark Margulis, Debbie Provis, Sarah Weinstein-Dennison, Paul Biddleman, Joseph Abada Ben-Chaviva, Sidi Spano, Tom Lee, Ricky Dessen, Benita Ganot, and Jimmy Berghoff. We now turn to the words of the Misha Bayrock. You can find them on page 253 in your Sidurim.
Shebeirach avoteinu mikor habracha le'imotenu. May the the source of strength, who bless the ones before us. Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishebeirach imotenu mikor habracha la'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
We'll now continue with our chanting of Torah. The next aliyah will begin on page 798, and Elaine Hochberg will be reading from Leviticus 19, verses 1 through 10. And for the honor of the first aliyah, we invite up her husband, Ari. Na'lamod l'aliyah hashenit.
ברכו את אדוני המבורך,
Baruch Adonai Hamvarach Leolam Vaed.
ברוך אדוני המבורך לעולם ועד, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו, ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
Amen. וידבר אדוני אל משה לאמור, דבר אל כל עדת בני ישראל, ואמרת עליהם קדושים תהיו, כי קדוש אני אדוני אלוהיכם. איש אמו ואביו תיראו, ואת שבתותי תשמורו, אני אדוני אלוהיכם. אל תפנו אל האלילים ואלוהי מסכה, לא תעשה לכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם. וכי תזבחו זבח שלמים לאדוני, לרצונכם תזבחוהו. ביום ובככם יאכל וממחרת, והנותר עד יום השלישי באש ישרף. ואם האוכל יאכל ביום השלישי, פיגול הוא לא ירצה, ויאכליו עוונו יישא, כי את קדוש אדוני חילל, ונקרתה הנפש ההיא מהמה. ובקוץ לכם את קציר עצכם לא תחלק, פאת צדך לקסור, ולכת קצירך לא תלקט, וכרמך לא תעולל, ופרת כרמך לא תלקט. לעני ולגר תעזוב אותם, אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נתן בתוכנו, ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
And I will just say, today would have been my father's 88th birthday.
Oh, beautiful. In his honor, in a beautiful way.
And we chanted the words that are above the ark.
Oh my, oh,
How special's that?
good catch. It's beautiful. I didn't see that. All right. Please rise as we lift and dress the Torah, and for Hagbah, I invite up our our resident Hagbah, Jacob, right? Like, what's the word? Our professional Hagbah.
Bigger than last week, that's for sure.
וזאת התורה אשר שם משה לפני בני ישראל על פי אדוני ביד משה יד You may be seated.
We continue with our Haftarah. This week's Haftarah, we read from Amos chapter 9, verses 7 through 15. And this Haftarah captures the inverse of the prescriptive rules we find in our Torah portion. So the inverse of those rules are a city, Jerusalem, filled with people who are guilty of killing innocent people. They've oppressed the downtrodden, strangers, orphans, and widows. Children have humiliated their own parents. Sexual impropriety is rampant. And worst of all, God concludes, "You have forgotten me." And God will not let those deeds go unpunished. And so we read this, and as I say each week, we affirm the connection between the Haftarah and the Torah portion. And by joining them together, we see a higher insight that while we are commanded to love our neighbor, that is a difficulty humans have struggled with for thousands of years. And our ancestors were technically worse at it than the people in this room, if I make a judgment, though I'm not God. And so we know we are part of an endless human struggle to be better, to be kinder, to be more upright, and sometimes to fall back. So for our Haftarah, I invite up Naomi Totter to read, and we find those words of Amos on page 814.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher bachar b'neviim tovim v'ritza b'divrei hanemarim behemet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah u'Moshe avdo Uv Yisrael amo, and v'yeh ha'emet, v'tzedek haloch yivnei, chushim atem li, b'nei Yisrael ne'um Adonai, halo et Yisrael, Heleti me'eret Mitzrayim, uflifti mikavtor, v'hara mikir, hine Adonai Elohim, v'mlacha hachda, v'hishmati ota, me'al panei ha'adamah, efes ki, lo hashmeid ashmid et beit Yaakov nu Adonai ki hinei anochi mitzaveh v'haneoti v'chol goyim et beit Yisrael kahasher yino abakvara v'lo yipol tzaror aretz b'cherev yamutu kol chatae ami hahomerim lo tagish v'takdim ba'adenu hara bayom hahu akim et sukat David hanofelet V'gadorti et pirtzehem, v'harisota bakim, uvniti hakimei olam, le'mahan Yerushu, et sherid Edom v'chol goyim, asher nikra shemi alehem, nu Adonai yosei zot, hine yamim ba'im nu Adonai, v'nigash choresh bakotzer, v'dorech hanabim v'moshe chazara, v'hitifu heharim asis, v'chol hagavot yitmu gagna, v'shavti et shavut ami Yisrael, uvanu arim neshamot v'yashavu v'naru cheramim v'shatu et yenam v'hasu ganot v'achalu et perehem unatatim al admatam v'al yinatashu me'al admatam asher natahati lahem amar Adonai Elohecha Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam tzor kol amim sadik b'chol odorot ha'el hana'eman ha'omer ve'osei ha'medaber kayem shekol devarav emet v'tzedek al haTorah v'al avodah v'al hanivim v'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh shenetat lanu Adonai Eloheinu likdusha v'limnucha lechavod ol tifaret al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach umavarashim otach yiparashimcha b'fikol chai tamid leolam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Mikadesh HaShabbat Amen.
Yasher koach.
You see, I started with the right hand and I couldn't sustain it.
We will now rise as we return the Torah to the Ark on page 254 in your Sidurim.
Eitz Chaim hi lama chazikim ba v'tom checha meushar derachecha darchei noam v'chon tivotecha shalom hashivenu Adonai elecha v'nashuva Chodesh, Chodesh Yameinu, Chodesh Yameinu kekedem.
We'll remain standing for the Aleinu on page 282.
Aleinu leshalbeach ladon hakol, latek gedula liotzer breshit, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו, ושמו, ושמו אחד.
So as we reflect on love, we also reflect on the sources of love, those that have risen us up and sustained us as we turn to those in our lives and spread love to our neighbors and beyond. And we think about those who brought love in our lives but are no longer with us. In this tradition, we recite the Mourner's Kaddish as a community, and we begin by acknowledging each stage of mourning. One of the most psychologically adept aspects of Judaism, understanding that mourning is a process. And so first we acknowledge Shiva, the first 7 days of mourning, Shloshim, the first 30, Shana, the first year, and finally Yartzeit, that perennial, yearly acknowledgement of those who have left us. In this congregation, we think of those who have recently departed: Sigmund Landis, Louis Weinberg, Sharon Kasdan, Kalman Abraham Soul, Doris Dobrin, Edith Kutcher, Herbert Landau, Michael Berkerhammer, Karen Salomon, Cyril Siegel, Joan Lee Eglow, Jean Jay, Jacqueline Rennick, Ellen Baxt, and Laura Zaken. I'll now turn to those in our community to share names, and I also invite mourners as we do so to come up and place stone upon slate as a tangible sign of love and legacy. But I'll begin first with those observing Shiva, the first 7 days of mourning. Anyone who would like to share a name of those who have passed in the first 30 days of mourning? Shana, the first year of mourning. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. There. Thank you very much. And now we'll turn to Yartzeit, those we are thinking of in our congregation who are observing the day of mourning, the anniversary of mourning. Jess Abramovitz, Henrietta Adelar, Ray Alterman, Charles Altman, George Barnett, Irving Bennett, Morty Berkman, Nathan Berkman, Solomon Berliner, Liev Bermanson, Norman Blass, Francis Crow Boschenkick, Abraham Brom, Marion Broad, Gertrude Kahn Bergheimer, Leopold Cecil, William Cohen, Evelyn Copeland, Estelle Daly, Shirley Coven Dansker, Joseph Eisner, Shmuel Falk, Edward N. Faglis, Rena Fondlander, June Frank, Peter Frank, Nettie G. Friedman, Natalie or Bobby Ginsberg, Nathan Goldberg, Dr. Larry Goldblatt, Patricia Goldstein, Rose K. Goodman, Lenny Groden, Adolf Gunzingdorfer, Edith Hall, Betty Handler, Seal Huntf, Carol Hirsch, Irvin Honick, Aaron J. Jacobs, Milton Jesselson, Hyman Kaplan, Frida Katz, Stanley Kornreich, Saul Lesser, Norman Levinson, Martin Levy, Anne Latinsky, Joseph Lieb, Stan Margolin, Malvin Marks, Stephanie Marks, Florence Mendel, Ralph J. Mendel, Deborah Menace, Aaron Archie Myers, Gertrude Mills, Fanny Neuberger, Edna Pellico, Fred Pfeiffer, Samuel Plotkin, Dorothy Reich, Mayor Reich, Nathan Robinson, Bella Rosenberg, Beatrice San, Mizia Schachter, Sidney Scheinfeld, Richard J. Schur Jr., Mary Sklar, Richard Scher, Leo Siegel, Samuel Siegler, George Sinclair, Samuel Abraham Singerman, Irving Sisman, Abner Slatt, Jacques Schlesinger, Albert Stern, Arthur Stern, Victor Teichner, Howard Todman, Sylvia Udall, Samuel W. Webster, Helen C. Weiss, Martin Weitzer, Kenneth Wharton, Stanley Weiner, and Alex Wolfman. And now those before me who are observing a yard site, please share their names. Thank you. Anyone else observing a yard site today? Or any names that I might have mispronounced? We continue with the Mourner's Kaddish on page 294. Please rise as a community to support our mourners. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divrach chiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh, v'chayachon uv'chayachon uv'chayeh dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kariv ve'imru amen. Yehei shemei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'almei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei kudisha brichu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'yimeru amen.
You may be seated. And we'll take a short moment for introductions. First and foremost, we're very excited about Tuesday evening's star-studded celebration of Israeli movies and television. We're honored to partner with the Israeli Film Center on Tuesday evening. Oh, interesting. That makes sense because I was there.
We don't have the right announcements today.
So that's a little confusing. I didn't catch that.
So we'll jump ahead. It's good.
All right, cool. Well, we have
That one hasn't happened yet.
I haven't been to the Bronx Zoo yet with CRS, and that's what we're looking forward to. It's a CRS outing on Sunday, May 7th. And we invite you and our family to spend a fun day here right in our own city. Can you imagine? We have one of the largest wildlife conservation parks, and we'll get to see close-up beautiful animals from all around the world. And finally, our 181st annual meeting of the congregation is on Tuesday, May 23rd at 7 p.m., and all congregants are welcome to attend. The agenda includes the election of trustees and officers, budget approval, and other business. Now, quickly, right after this, we're actually going to do Kiddush in here rather than outside because we have an event following this with Rabbi Strassfeld, and we will talk about his book, Judaism Disrupted. And after that, we get some nosh on the 5th floor in the Eisner. So I highly recommend you can attend and get that nosh, but also learn something. It's gam v'gam, both great things, this and that. And so we can.
One more announcement.
She has one more announcement.
One more announcement. But maybe before you go to the Bronx Zoo on Sunday, if anyone's interested, this coming Sunday, May 7th, I will be ordained as a cantor at Temple Emmanuel. If you would like to come in person, you are welcome. The ceremony starts at 9:30. Just need a proof vaccination. There's also a live stream link. So if you can't attend in person, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to send you the live stream link. Would love to have you join us. Yes, Naomi, do you have an announcement? Yes, May 20th after services. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. And we'll conclude our service this morning with Vishamru before we immediately go over and do Kiddush and Motzi. So we will join together in those words. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. B'ni uvein b'nei Yisrael oti leolam, oti leolam. Veshamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim ve'et ha'aretz veshamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. We have one more verse, folks. Uvayom hashvi Shabbat vayinafash. May we all rest. Shabbat vayinafash. Shabbat vayinafash. Veshamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asot et ha-Shabbat ledorotam berit olam. We'll raise our glasses of wine or grape juice, whatever your choice. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Amen. L'chaim, everyone. All right, here we go. Oh, what a beautiful challah we have, and it's actually a whole challah this week. Here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Please stick around. Okay. We're not going to tell you. It is in wrapping still, so we're good. But feel free to open up the challah.
I'm telling you, 5th floor Eisner, just after the Q&A. Michael Strasfeld.
Yeah, but I think in the beginning, I'm gonna, do an introduction on the book so that we don't lose. I think the rabbi's gonna. Would you work it out?
Oh my God, no.
So fun.
You're amazing. Thank you. Hi, it's so nice to meet you. If you want to hold up the book.
Huh?
I said if you want to just hold up your book and hold it, you can take mine.
Yeah, I brought my own just in
Yeah, there
case.
you go. Very nice.
So I think we're all set.
Yeah.
We'll do an introduction, and I'm going to do a short introduction, and then
Yes.
talk a little bit about echoing what you started with about holiness. I think it's a perfect.
Well, it was very influenced because I've been reading your book really carefully the last couple of days, so I'm just trying to kind of get your
No,
message.
I really appreciated the way you wove it in, so it felt naturally rather than. And that reminds me of Tuesday, which is mentioned in the book. Like what? Like,
Or
No, is
on the
it-
flip side, like, oh, that's like on page 50 when he says something that's completely unconnected and we don't know what the context is or how the book goes.
yeah, it was a very nice service.
I hope that just a basic biography is okay. I
Yeah,
realize I should have asked for yours.
No, I know. I really like it.
Well, I'm very excited to get started. Just as a quick introduction, Rabbi Strassfeld's a graduate of the Maimonides School, and he started college at YU, but transferred to Brandeis. Yay, go Brandeis. And graduated in
A long time
a long time ago. I
can
realized
say it, I
I
don't
walked into that. That was. Yeah. He holds his master's from Brandeis in Near Eastern and Judaic Studies and completed his doctoral work in Jewish history at Brandeis. He was ordained by the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, and he first received public attention through his work with the Jewish catalog. Beautiful. And so we're very, very lucky to have him here, and he's going to give us a brief introduction.
So, Yeah, and you'll see when I graduated at Brandeis, just from the first line of the introduction, which I should put my glasses on, which is another sign of. So 50 years ago, a group of young people, myself included, edited a book called The Jewish Catalog, whose tagline was a do-it-yourself kit. And it described our desire to show people how to embrace a vibrant Judaism for themselves. It clearly touched a nerve, selling over 300,000 copies. My new book, which won't sell 300,000 copies, Judaism Disrupted, a spiritual manifesto for the 21st century, addresses a different question, not how to build a Jewish life, but why? Or more to the point, why bother? While most Jews feel proud of being Jewish, many people find its rituals and institutions irrelevant. The premise of my book is that the purpose of Judaism is not to make us better Jews, but to help us become good people, offering wisdom and practices to take the most precious gift we have been given, our lives, and live with purpose. We live in disruptive times. For the Jewish people, this is nothing new. When the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, rabbinic leaders responded by creating a Judaism that was portable, that could be taken wherever the winds of misfortune would carry the Jewish people. Today, we need something different. In the open society in which we live and thrive, we need a Judaism that is permeable, enabling us to interact with the world around us, that is more inclusive, as more and more Jewish families include people who are not Jewish. This requires a re-envisioning of Judaism. My book outlines core principles with simple practices, some traditional and some others brand new, that help bring an awareness into our lives, cultivating qualities such as gratitude for our blessings, compassion for fellow human beings, and a sense of satisfaction rather than an endless striving for what we think we lack. For more than 3,000 years, the Jewish people has engaged in a discussion of how to live a life of meaning. Judaism Disrupted is for anyone seeking to find within our tradition new ways to unroll the Torah scroll to find meaning in this moment. And I wanted to just say a few words about this morning's Torah portion. And I want to actually just take this moment to thank Rabbi Weller for connecting the Torah portion and my book, and want to pick up on the basic point that she was making. And I also want to thank the cantor. She left. Well, you could tell her that she has not only a really good voice, but her spirit is really present, and she is completely deserving to become a cantor next week. So you can tell her. So a few words about this Torah portion. As Rabbi Weller talked about, that Kedoshim, particularly the second part in the chapter Leviticus 19, is part of what's the Bible scholars call the holiness code, because that word is word kadosh, holy, is very prevalent, if you want to use that word, in the chapter. And what's remarkable is that I think if you asked people, sort of just generally, what does the word holy mean? I think, first of all, it's a challenge to answer, like to define what that might mean. But they would probably connect it somehow with religious matters, with God, maybe with holy people or holy places. And what is striking about Leviticus 19, as the rabbi said, is most of the most well-known ethical principles in the Torah, in the Bible, are in chapter 19. Love your neighbor as yourself is the most well-known, but all of them, don't put a stumbling block before the block, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're all right there, which is a clear statement that holiness is about, as you said, how you interact in your life with the annoying people and the not annoying people, right? The person who's, sitting next to you and is whatever, rustling papers, while someone's talking. And it could be minor annoyances, and it could be more significant and more disturbing or troubling. But holiness and a holy life and Jewish life is to be lived in the interaction with the people that you live with, the people that you work with, the people that you meet occasionally, your doorman, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a really important teaching about holiness and about Judaism. And the second piece of that is I'm very influenced by Hasidic teachings. Hasidism, in case you don't know, is a movement that began in the 18th century, a pietistic movement, which still continues today, but Hasidism today is very different than it was at the beginning. Talk for another time, perhaps. And one of the interesting things in Hasidism was that they broke from earlier Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, Zohar, if those words mean anything to you, which saw the material world, as in many other religions, as a challenge or an enticement away from spirituality. In that sense, the best way to be spiritual was to be as least material as you could be. Hasidism took a different path and said that there is holiness in the world. And it's related to what I just said about every interaction you have with a person can be potentially a holy interaction, or it could be the opposite of holy, a hurtful interaction, or it could be a neutral interaction. But everything in life has that potential to be holy, to bring the world, one small step closer to redemption. And it wasn't, in their understanding, what I call in the book the Jewishly Jewish things. That is, it wasn't only holiness could be found when you're in synagogue and in services, or when you're studying, Torah, or when you're eating matzah at a seder. This life of holiness, of connection, was to be lived all the time, and that it was a category mistake to think that, as I said in my introduction, that Judaism is about being a good Jew. It's much broader. It's much more all-encompassing than that. And so one of the core principles in my book, I have a number of core principles, is that holiness is everywhere. And that derives from this Hasidic teaching, and I think really changes broadly our relationship to the world. The world then isn't, a seductive trap. It's an opportunity, and every moment, everything, it has the potential to be a gateway to holiness, to goodness, whatever language most appeals to you. So that's my introduction, and I think you were going to ask me some questions. While you're doing that, I'll just show you the book and the cover, which I'm very proud of. Judaism Disrupted. Well, I'll sing a little song while
Yeah, can you sing a song? What's your favorite flavor of ice cream? Sorry, I'm
So the book is available everywhere. The questions are coming in a second.
One of the challenges standing up here is that we have papers, and often people accidentally go off with the paper we need. So
Someone stole the questions.
someone stole the questions. It's always good to blame someone.
Probably my wife.
Please, yes, we're going to Q&A, so yes.
I thought the mission of Judaism is to be a better Jew, but I thought that isn't being a better Jew being a better person? I mean, isn't that kind of by definition why we do what we do?
In that sense, you could, I think, yes, you're right. I think it's important for me because to stress that it's not just doing the Jewishly Jewish thing, because I think there's, as I say, there's a category mistake. A lot of the established Jewish community talks about Jewish continuity, like we have to have Jewish continuity. And they try and assess, is Jewish continuity increasing or decreasing? And they'll do surveys, and they'll say, well, do you light Shabbat candles Friday night regularly? Do you do X, Y, and Z? And all those things are Jewish ritual things. And the fact that someone could be, I devote like hours each week on social justice, doesn't particularly come up on those surveys, right? So in some ways they're kind of, they're not irrelevant questions, but they're not at the heart of what it's about. And the other piece is, Joy and I had an interesting experience a while ago. We were at it was a panel of Jewish artists talking about their art and their Judaism, and of course it was in Soho, and each, and the artists would talk about their art, and then, one of them said, well, the truth is I'm a mediocre Jew. And the gallery owner, who was also Jewish, got up and said, well, I'm a bad Jew. And it became clear in the conversation that they understood what it means to be a good Jew is to come to synagogue, regularly each week. And none of them did that. And none of them felt interested in synagogue or ritual life, or they felt we don't know anything, or we won't be welcome there, which I don't think is true, but that's how they see it. They see themselves as outsiders. And in that sense, that Judaism, in their definition, which is this narrow definition, they don't feel connected to, they don't feel any place in. And as long as many people feel that and don't understand it as you do, as that those two things are the good people and good Jews are the same, then I think there'll be many people who stand outside and think, everybody these days is proud to be Jewish, I think. Nobody's changing their names as like too Jewish, change Goldstein to Gold or whatever like that. That's no, but it's a question. I think the big question is how important and how much of your life and how you live your life and how you think about your life is connected to Judaism. So I'm sure all those artists have some kind of Passover Seder because most Jews have. But it's if that's the beginning and end of their Judaism, then I think we're in trouble. And in some ways, I think the Jewish world is in trouble these days.
Well, that's a really great segue. And actually, I really thank you, Scott, for jumping in. David, I'm skipping, Scott and David, I confuse you two, and it's very rude. I'm so sorry.
He was at the Israeli films last week.
Something happened at that film. I'm just kidding. I can't help making jokes about that. What I appreciate about that question was it really got to, it hit a kind of question I too was wondering, and so I just want to encourage you all, as I'm asking questions, if others arise, though we will have a section of question and answer at the end, I like being interrupted because I'm a Jew. So please feel free to jump in. But first, I do want to ask, one of the key arguments underlying your book, and you establish it in maybe the first 20 pages, is that halakha is no longer legally binding, and that it allows you to explore mitzvot with new intentions that go beyond the sheer requirements of getting a mitzvah done, or as some would say, being yotze, like done out of the obligation. But the Reform movement has held this to be true since its inception over 100 years ago, and we are a Reform community. So I think that there are other things we're struggling with, including literacy, for one, and a sense of Jewish authenticity. So with that, I'm curious how you translate your vision to this kind of community.
Yeah, it's a good question. Next. No. No, I think you're right that analysis is correct. That the way I'm talking about is more critical for communities that feel in some fashion halachic or and Reform, long ago left that. I think what's still important, and we're in a transition. It's not like, as anybody who's here for this service could experience, the intentionality that you would say something about here's what is going on, rather than turn to page 63, we do this, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that, so one of the, besides the it's not halacha Jewish law shift, I think the other thing that is important is, for me, is a shift in understanding of ritual. That I think even if you're not halachic, or maybe even more than if you're not halachic, because then I don't need to do it, I don't feel commanded to do it, so why am I doing this thing? Which, and I think when it comes, as you said again earlier, nobody says love your neighbor, but love your neighbor as yourself. Well, I don't know. Does that make any sense? No. Everybody thinks that's great. You could think it's difficult to live by, as it is difficult to live by, but it's not. No one has any doubts that is a good moral teaching. But I mix milk and meat, right? So there's a whole series of rituals, some of which Reform movement early on rejected partly for those reasons and other reasons. Some of them have come back somewhat in the Reform movement in more recent years. But I think broadly, people wonder about rituals. Like, why do I need to do that? And even if I believe in a God, the God I believe in, does that God really care if I have a cheeseburger or not? Like, really? Or I sneak a little bread on Passover? Like, really? I don't know if I want to believe in that God that would care, right? So I'm suggesting that we shift the understanding from ritual from we do this because God commands it, or we do this because the Jewish people have always done it, to that it's really about an awareness practice. And it's kind of borrowing from the notions of contemporary spirituality, that you can either, in some ways sleepwalk through life, or you can have attempts to bring yourself to a sense of awareness, of awareness of the moment, awareness of, I want to be grateful for this food I'm eating, these different kinds of qualities. And of course, sometimes it just arises naturally, but practices is because these feel like important things that I want to remind myself of, or I want to dedicate myself to improving, or I want to make a regular part of my life. So just to give you one example. So I'm not checking what anybody does or doesn't do, but I would say many Jews have a mezuzah on their front door. Some may have mezuzah on some of the other doors in their apartment, but I would say many Jews have that. And I think it's, becomes like many things hanging in your house. It becomes the wallpaper. You don't even realize it's there. And very traditional Jews will go, you've probably seen this, they go from room to room kissing the mezuzah, like 5 times if you walk the length of the house or the apartment. And, and it has the challenge of being rote ritual, which is a danger of any practice. But so I suggest, what if you took a moment in the morning as you're about to leave your house, and acknowledge the transition from home, which has its own sense of security and home, out into the outside world, which has its challenges, has its opportunities, and all those things. It's not a good and bad. It's different. Acknowledging the difference, and taking a moment, just a moment, to set a spiritual orientation for the day, whatever that is. It could be like, Modeh Ani, I'm grateful that I'm alive for another day. It could be more directed. I know I have this difficult meeting, and I want to remind myself to bring an extra measure of patience to the annoying people that I know are going to be at that meeting. Whatever it is. Or it could just be taking that moment. So in a sense, it's to say, remember to take your keys, your phone, and this spiritual orientation as you walk out the door. And you could do a similar thing when you come home. Wipe off the dust or schmutz of the day and try and leave that behind as you come back into this space that it's not like home doesn't have its own challenges, but it's different and it's special. And that it's just an example of, taking this traditional thing and making it come alive, but saying, like, I want my day to be framed that way, and I want to do it in a way that's really possible. I could, do the traditional morning service, which even if you're a speed reader in Hebrew, it would take you 30 minutes, right? And I think for a lot of reasons, people aren't going to do that, but that's a lot of time in the morning when you're trying to. So here's something you could do, and it takes, a minute or two, but actually may have an impact. Other times it may not on your experience of the day. And I'm thinking about rituals broadly in that manner. I'm thinking about the festival cycle in that manner as well. So once a year, we're supposed to focus on tshuva, no change. Not that you shouldn't think about it all the time, but it helps. If you say, I'm going to do it all the time, then you'd end up not doing it. If you say, I'll do it tomorrow, tomorrow is always tomorrow, right? But to say, okay, it's this moment, I'm going to focus on this. On Passover, I'm really going to focus on freedom. And I think Passover is actually meant to focus us on food, right? Because bread, which is perfectly kosher for 51 weeks a year, now, like, we can't have any of it, right? It doesn't, what? Doesn't make sense, right? So I think it's just to say this basic activity of human beings of eating and food, which actually for many people, maybe perhaps most people, is actually not simple. People struggle with what they're eating and their weight and how they look and how they think they look. And so maybe it's useful once a year to take a week and focus on that. And I could do that with each of the holidays, but I wanted to stop.
Thank you. And one thing that I really appreciate your answer is the echoes that I heard in studies I've undertaken in rabbinic life and their underlying attitudes to the prayers that they prayed. For example, the idea of having intentionality as you go from private to public life. That I read a fantastic article by a woman who teaches at our HUC Jerusalem campus, and she talks about Nasim B'chol Yom as this act of reconstituting oneself before going out into the public world. And I think that's actually just such a strength of your book, that you capture things that actually are quite ancient and very much in the spirit of what the rabbis intended as they created what we pray today. a lot has happened since the rabbis, a lot has happened in the rabbinic world. And with that has come this question of authenticity for Reform Jews. And so I really think that hits the nail on the head.
And that, I think it's all about intentionality.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And the truth is, the rabbis didn't stress intentionality. They made it, I think, this is my theory, they made a choice, and they stressed fulfillment. And they thought if they stressed fulfillment, and they said, and you also had to have intentionality, then the system could really lead, to OCD, right? That there is like, every time, I'm we're lighting the Hanukkah candles, but all I can think about is what's the present I'm going to get, And so then, okay, I have to light the candles again, so it could be like movie, take 50. So the rabbis certainly wanted people to have intention, right? They didn't think that was unimportant, but they didn't make it a requirement. Halakhically, you do not have, there's one or two things you have to have intention for, but basically most of the mitzvot, you're supposed to do them. So they emphasize that, and I think it's really intention that we're.
So when you say fulfillment, you don't mean it in any spiritual or deep way. You mean fulfillment of the mitzvot, just the enactment, the mechanical
It's
enactment.
right. So, I mean, much as I'm sure you know, much of the Talmud is saying, okay, well, if you're going to, light Hanukkah candles, how do you put the candles in this way, and you light them that way. So that's what they wanted. They wanted to tell you, how much matzah do you have to eat to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah? And a different answer would be, who cares? If you like matzah, eat a bunch. If you don't like it, eat a little bit. I mean, the point is, matzah is supposed to make us focus on freedom. So if you want to focus on freedom without eating matzah, I don't care, whatever. I mean, let's talk about something. Right. Let's talk about something important. Right. That's what I'm saying, and that I think is a shift that's not just. It's related to the fulfillment that Reform Judaism has already, but I think that the other piece of intentionality is really critical, because ultimately, I think if people find that Jewish practices, I like using the word practices, rather than commandments or mitzvot, then they'll want to do it. In other words, if someone says, I do this thing with the mezuzah, and I really like it. It has meaning, and and maybe there's other things in Judaism, and maybe not. Maybe this is the one thing that really grabs me. But I think the more it feels related and to things you care about, and helpful with dealing with the challenges that everyone faces in life, then people will say there's wisdom here, and I want to do this. It's helpful. Why wouldn't I want to do it?
Thank you. As we go on and collect questions, I ask that you use the microphone for our viewers on the live stream. They can't hear you if you
my
speak
viewers.
without a microphone. So thank you. I will come, let's see. I don't know who was first. Okay. Honor code, who raised their hand
I'll burst into song. I'm not right. I'm noticing the similarities between focusing and intentionality with practices of meditation.
Right.
And being in the moment. What's the other thing where, it's the first moment of something where you're saying, going from inside to outside. It's a new moment. I'm noticing so many similarities. I'd like to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, well, an important moment. My journey. I grew up in a excuse me. I grew up in a modern Orthodox home in the Boston area, and you heard in my bio I went to day school, etc. And then I was part of the Jewish counterculture, the Chavrat Shalom, one of the intentional communities in the late 60s, early 70s. And then I got a glass of water. And thank you, dear. And I think one of the important things for me was becoming involved in Jewish spirituality. There's Sylvia Borstein is a somewhat well-known meditation teacher, and unlike, many of the American spirituality meditation teachers are of Jewish origin, but most of them, I think, feel little connection with that. But she is deeply engaged in this, but is also very deeply Jewishly engaged. And a number of years ago, she was asked to do a retreat for rabbis, and it was like about a dozen, a little bit less rabbis. And that was my first real experience with meditation. I'd actually went to there was a place in Soho that had courses, open, I don't know, whatever it is. One summer I took a course. I thought, that's interesting. But so it was many years later. And it became, for me, in some ways, the lens of looking at Judaism. And that's where I go to this. You're right, that it very much echoes. And in some ways, the question is, how do you create practices that help you come to attention, right? So the idea with meditation isn't like, gee, I want to be a great meditator for half an hour in the morning, but I could be like this obnoxious person the rest of the day. That somehow that experience will carry over into the day. Or I would say, some people have this practice of daily meditation, right? And Judaism has a practice of once a week, 24-hour meditation, which is called Shabbat, right? So in that sense, it's just different, and I'm sure other traditions have some other variation of that, right? So in some ways, that's what Shabbat is. It's to remove yourself from your everyday and rest and reflect in a different kind of spirit. And other places say, well, you should go on a week retreat, So these are all choices, but I think you're right that it's. I think increasingly that's how many people are looking at religion as an awareness practice, and part of the reason Hasidism is so important is because it's an authentic Jewish tradition. It isn't just, let's borrow from Buddhism as translated by the American meditation teachers, which is part of what's happened and which is good. But most people aren't learning the original chants in whatever language they were in.
Let Arnie answer.
Yeah, no, I know that. So I think what I find confusing is that you'll hear people say, I'm a bad Jew, which they would define exactly as you said. But then they'll say, but I'm a spiritual person. And, and that means in practice that they don't have to educate themselves about anything about Judaism. They don't educate their children about anything about Judaism. And they get their notions of spirituality and mindfulness from the general culture. Right. So doesn't that have a serious negative implication for...
Yes. Well, yes. In other words, I agree. In other words, I think the problem is too many people think... The problem is... That's better. Too many people think that they're a bad Jew, or what Judaism has to offer is not mixing milk and meat, and like, I just don't get it. Like, I'm a locavore, I get that. If someone else is a vegetarian, I get that. All the other food practices, nobody has to explain them. You could think, I don't want to do that. I really like my steak. But, it isn't like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you be a vegetarian? It's a choice, right? So I think too many people think Judaism doesn't have much to offer, and what it has to offer is like, way over there, and it's stuff I don't get or I feel incompetent. And why would I be interested? Because it feels all they're doing is saying, you have to do these things to be a good Jew, and like, I don't get it. Like, and it's a bunch of rituals. So that's why I said, I think the more it feels, wow, this is amazing, right? In the way that I think in some fashion the world looks at Shabbat and says, or even if they don't look at it, if you had say to someone, here's what Shabbat is about. Now, if you say you can't turn on the electricity, you have to tear the toilet paper before Shabbat begins, no, I'm not, that's lunacy. But if you say it's really, to stop working or to stop, your electronic connection for a period of time in a world where, now we're always linked in electronically, I think people would say, I can't do that, but I admire you for doing it, right? I get what it has to offer. It's only a question of I'm really going to commit myself to doing that. So that's what I think it's about. I think, unfortunately, too many people think Judaism, it's only important to the people who are in it. And they've kind of bought into this for whatever reason, but there's not much there. And if there's a few, Passover Seder, we all like it, so we'll do it, and that's true, but they don't get the richness of what could be.
So first and foremost, you're speaking, you're very much preaching to the choir. This is a community of people who are very, very dedicated to holding Jewish tradition.
Right.
They come here each Saturday. So I just really want to acknowledge that. Something I love about each person in this room. I know there are other questions, and I'll get to you. There's just one last question I really want to ask you, and I'm really curious about, and that is, what are the implications of your work, or what's your vision for our collective institutional expression of Judaism?
Good question. I put together, the core principles, and then I realized as I was near finishing the book that I had to add another core principle, and that one was about community. Because a lot of this, you can imagine like, that's a nice thing about kissing the mezuzah or just stopping on there before you go out, but you're not doing that with a whole group of Jews, you're just doing it yourself, right? And if I'm eating a meal and I'm expressing gratitude, maybe if there are other people, we'll do it together, but otherwise it could be a very individual, which, can lead to narcissism, which is, a challenge in our world. So I wanted to, I have this chapter about community, and partly it's about Leviticus 19, right, that love your neighbor as yourself. It's really easy to do if you don't have any neighbors, right? But it's, it's living in life, living in community, right? So on that level, that's like really important. And on the level, I actually borrow, or maybe steal, a term from Isaac Mayer Wise, who was leading Reform rabbi of the 19th century, who talked about Minhag America, which means literally the custom of American Jews, right? And he at the time thought, based on a lot of evidence that turned out to be wrong, that Reform Judaism would be the only form of Judaism, that Orthodoxy would disappear, conservative Judaism didn't exist, and that Reform was rapidly becoming, the basic form of Judaism. As we know, that didn't exactly turn out that way, but I like the term because partly it's an expression that it's not law, it's minhag. Minhag is a custom. It's not commanded, it's just the way we do things. And I thought that's a better description. And I think we're at a time which is calling for lots of experimentation of different ways of doing that. And I think that is true of not all synagogues, but many synagogues are trying different things, and they tried things 50 years ago, some of which continue, and some of which, that didn't work, and that's okay. But I like the Minhag America rather than, it could be Minhagei America, the customs of American Jews, because I think it's really important for us to see ourselves as one. So even if, whoever, you over there, is doing, celebrating Shabbat in a very different way than I am and the person over there, instead of saying, which is a lot what happens now, that person's too religious, they're a fanatic, that person aren't serious enough, the only one who's right is me, Instead of that notion, just say, look, we do things differently. And anybody who is committed to being involved in Jewish life, they're part of the people. Everybody is in. Nobody needs to, check off. You got to get 5 out of 7 on this list of do you do these Jewish things, right? And I think that as well is both a challenge, but I think that is a different way. First I thought, well, maybe long after I'm gone, and probably everybody in this room is gone, something will emerge as this is what the Judaism of the 22nd century will be like. But I wonder whether, in fact, it will be many Judaisms, but the difference will be we're all part of the same thing. The truth is, it doesn't really affect me like how you observe this or you observe that. Like, it doesn't change my observance or my Judaism. There are moments when you come together, you have to work it out, because whether you're eating together, you're praying together, you got to work it out. But, I'll tell you quickly the story. There was one, I was the rabbi at SAJ, and this couple showed up one Shabbat morning for services, and they had little kids, and during the service, they gave the kids coloring books, and the kids were coloring kind of things. So at the ritual committee meeting, I eventually got rid of the ritual committee, but at the ritual committee meeting, a person said, oh my God, this is terrible. We have to assign someone who's going to go over and tell them to stop doing this, and maybe you should do this, Rabbi. I'm not doing it. And I said, look, there's another way to think of this. Isn't it great that somebody with kids showed up at our service where we don't have anybody with kids coming regularly? And isn't it really great that they thought, maybe the kids are going to be disturbing to the other people, so let's bring something that they can do. And so, we could bring a really loud, noisy toy. That doesn't work, so we're going to give them, paper with crayons. Like, okay. And the truth is, like halakhically, but even more broadly, the fact that they're coloring doesn't interfere with your experience of Shabbat morning. Like, what's the difference? Close your eyes if it, move someplace. It's only in your head that this is offensive, or this isn't nice, or this is, why are they doing this? And I also had the sense that some of the people that sang this, they go home and they do the equivalent of coloring. They're not observing Shabbat like somebody in Borough Park, but they want here in the synagogue to be, sacredly Jewish. So let's not have anybody use cell phones in the halls in the synagogue, right? We're using cell phones in a service during the day, during the weekday, is just as obnoxious as on Shabbat, right? It's disturbing, right? So when it's disturbing, fine, but when it's not, why don't you side on the side of good intentions? Maybe they weren't doing this to, be in our face about it. Maybe they were, or maybe they didn't really know. Maybe they had no idea that you're not allowed to color. Like, why would you know that, right? So, for me, that's an important shift away, and it's broadly with this openness, the permeable, to be open to the world rather than to feel. I think part of the dynamic, now that I'm saying, like some of the people at the synagogue, was we have to stand on guard. We can't let the standards slip. Otherwise, there will be chaos, and it will be the end of Judaism as we know it. And it's possible we live in a world where the future of Judaism is uncertain. That is clearly true. But the reason I wrote the book is because I think we need to do a variety of things that will make Judaism more vibrant, more attractive, more accessible than it is, or certainly as it's perceived.
Thank you. Quick temperature check. Raise your hand if you have a question. I saw about 5 people who had questions before, so just want to, and I believe you had a question as well that I didn't see. Okay, so I ask because we have 10 minutes, and I'm going to try to do my best to reach each of you, and we will go to the Eisner, the 5th floor after this, where you can continue to ask questions to the rabbi.
You want to take like 2 questions, and I'll try and answer them at the same time? Yeah, maybe you can try and ask questions that are no yes answers.
That's going to be difficult. This is really an extension of what you were just addressing, Michael. Oh, does that work better? Okay.
Yeah, eat the mic.
What you're really discussing is very much sort of a universalist kind of approach, it seems to me, to individual practice and individual addressing of many of the issues. And it really sort of comes back to what I think about what your vision is 20 years from now, 30 years from now, of what Jewish peoplehood is going to be all about, and what Jewish community is going to be all about. And those, for many of us, are key items, and much less, than the spirituality side of this, if I may. So, what is your thinking about where that is going to go, and obviously the implications for our institutions?
Thank you. And I believe the second person I recently saw was Myra. I know there are others. I will make sure to get to you.
Well, I think things like words like spirituality and meditation are kind of all pieces of the puzzle of the human need for some kind of experience other than the literal or cerebral experience. And part of that is prayer, and which I really haven't heard you mention. You dipped into it a little bit when you mentioned community. There's prayer and there's God. And those things are important. Not everything can be answered by meditation. And frankly, if I saw children coloring during services, I think someone should tell them that it's inappropriate. Otherwise, you're just watering down standards, because it really does affect the communal prayer experience of the congregation. And there's nothing wrong with telling people, we don't do that right now. Here's a book to look at.
Okay. So we disagree on the latter part, but right now I'm trying to remember the first part. No, Oh, prayer, right. Yeah. Prayer and God. So there is one of the principles in the book, just, is it's a 3-part chapter. It's wrestling with God. It's about prayer, and it's about idolatry. So I won't talk about idolatry because of time, but I think, and again, as the rabbi said, you're people who come regularly, so obviously you must find the prayer experience on some level or in different ways works for you. And I think the service this morning is a good example of ways to improve upon the services of the past. I think it's both God and prayer is probably the most challenging people for whom this is not in their experience. I mean, prayer not in their experience, and the idea of God, I think a lot of people find challenging. I just don't believe, I'm not sure, I don't care. And, one of the questions, in terms of peoplehood, in some ways, I think for some people who stress peoplehood is because that they feel totally comfortable with. Once you add God, and like, no, I don't really believe. And I think that's a challenge. Not everybody is in agreement in the Jewish community. I can just, in that way, speak for myself, which for me, I feel like a religious, spiritual element is essential for Judaism, particularly, living in America as a minority in a very big place. I think it's certainly possible to be a cultural Jew if you live in Israel, because you speak Hebrew, you know the Bible. The Jewish holidays are the holidays, right? There's a real richness to that life, and I could go on about that, but I think it's somewhat obvious. I think it's a much more challenging notion in America, and we are a minority in this big C. I know some. Not maybe as much as God, but for many people, spirituality is also like, like it's too woo-woo, and it's. I think that's lessened somewhat in the last couple decades. But when I use it, it's really, is focused on your inner life, which I think everybody has. We live in post-Freud. We all have a sense of psychology, and that what we think is this is obvious is actually no, it's not so obvious, right? Like, why am I acting this way? Something has triggered this, that I'm sort of angry at this person, and it really wasn't so much what they said, but it was because they reminded me of somebody in my past or some incident, right? All that stuff. And I think that in the modern world, in America, the focus is really, on some level, on our inner lives, right? I say, like, America was built on this notion of the frontier. There was always, over there, you could go, start over again, nobody would know you, you have another chance, second chance, etc. And there was always more land. Well, obviously, that isn't true anymore, but I think the frontier now is interior, right? When people no longer, a couple hundred years ago, almost everybody was, didn't know whether they would have food tomorrow, right? There were a few people that were rich, the king and a couple of guys, but so you were all focused on just getting by. And you didn't think of work as a career. You thought of it was, if I don't do this, I'm going to starve and my family's going to starve. Well, that's changed for many of us, right? And so work has become career, and this issue of meaning has, I think, become much more central. Now, there are plenty of people in the world, probably more people in the world, who are still living that other life, meaning I just want food for tomorrow. But I think for us, this has become what we really are concerned about most of the time. And you know, why am I not more successful? Why am I angry at this person? Why can't I be more generous? Why can't I, etc. All those things that we live with. And I think that gives religion and Judaism a particular role to play. It's not to explain how the world works, which is what people used to think religion was about. Science explains how the world works. Religion's about all the things that can't be explained that way. That's right? It's all the emotional things. It's not the... So that define ways and wisdom and practices that focus on that, and I think would be, partly attractive to people who are focused on Jewish peoplehood, and kind of continuing to broaden the definition of what Jewish institutions, including synagogues, do. That I see as some framework for that future, which is still uncertain.
Thank you. It is 12:30, so we will be heading into the Eisner. I first want to thank you so much, Rabbi Strassfeld. That was such a wonderful look into how we can engage more meaningfully with our Jewish lives. And speaking of interiors, what he spoke of is just the surface of this book. I highly recommend it. It goes so deeply into so many elements of our Jewish lives and the many practices of those lives, what they can mean. And so from here, if you have more questions, please feel free to ask Rabbi Strassfeld on the 5th floor, where there's Nosh. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you all.
Tzoraim Tovim. Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Oh, that was really great.